All right, so this is Natasha with Books Go Social, Dublin Writers Conference 2017. I have with me here Richard Bradburn. He is actually an editor and not a writer. So tell us a little bit about the genre you edit for and what inspired you to choose that genre.
Well, I edit all genres really, so and non-fiction as well, but genre fiction I suppose is the most widely, it's the most popular. So I've actually recently got a lot of literary fiction, so kind of defying genre boundaries. I am a writer actually. I do have a book coming out. It's a YA paranormal thriller that I'll probably be using BooksGoSocial to do some publicity with. That's going to come out later this year. I'm hoping that it'll come out around kind of the Halloween kind of, because obviously for the paranormal thing that's going to make a bit of sense.
Well, that's great news. I did not know you were also a writer.
It's I think for editing fiction, it's actually kind of important. If you're going to talk the talk, you really ought to be able to walk the walk. It's not a prerequisite for understanding storycraft and all this stuff, but it just gives me some confidence that if I can write a book, I also share the journey that the author is going through, so I know a little more, in a little more detail, what that process is like for the author. I've been on the other side of the table. I've been edited myself, and I know how it can be a kind of a painful process.
All right, fantastic. Well, where can we find out more about you and your work? Do you have like a website or a blog? Or?
I do, yeah. I've got a website, www.editorial.ie is the site. There's a page for fictional authors, which is most of my business. And there's a blog there as well. I regularly write for the Irish Times on writing and editing, so you'll see my articles in there, generally in the culture section. And various, I write about all sorts of subjects, but largely it's questions that come up regularly on a regular basis from my editing clients. It's a global client list, the wonders of the internet. I can sit at my desk in my barn, overlooking the sea down in rural West Cork, but I'm talking to an author in Australia, so it's a fantastic profession.
All right, well, do you have any tips for us as an editor?
Well, there's one thing that I would like to mention. It came up in my talk that I gave yesterday, and it's really just a rather different perspective on writing that novice writers quite often don't get. Writing is a collaborative process, and when you say that to novice writers, they're kind of like, how can it possibly be a collaboration?
Right.
I have been sitting in my attic for the last 5 years writing my YA mermaid steampunk thriller romance mystery, and I've talked to nobody except the milkman for the past 5 years. So what possible process of collaboration could there be? And I explained to them, well, that's great, but what you've done is that's your first draft. That's not the book that's going to be published. Please don't try and publish, a book that you've taken 5 years to write and you only talk to the milkman. In fact, if you have been sitting in an attic thinking only of mermaids for the last 5 years, I'd suggest that book will probably take a little more editing than most. But anyway, but the self-publishing explosion that happened in 2008, 2009, when Amazon Kindle and all that stuff really got going, self-publishers were in danger, or independent authors I prefer to call them, were in danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If you're skipping the entire traditional publishing model, then you're forgetting the fact that the traditional publisher didn't just pay you in advance, take a manuscript, turn it into a book and sell it in Eason's or Barnes and Noble or wherever, whatever bookshop. They actually had a creative element an element of creativity in the process. There'd be an acquisitions editor who chose your book out of all the other submissions. There'd be a developmental editor maybe behind them, copy editing and proofreading and so on. So in skipping the traditional publishing model, lots of independent authors decided they could skip the entire process of collaboration with an author. Every book that's ever been traditionally published has been edited.
Right.
Shakespeare had an editor, Dickens, Thackeray, Hemingway. They all had editors. To skip that phase and say, I'm just going to do it all myself, is just like really a bit of a recipe for disaster. And unfortunately, the whole process of indie publishing has got dragged down when that first happened, that first big explosion. There's lots of evidence on you know, the lower reaches of the Amazon and Kindle, whatever, book titles that will show, you know, books that really shouldn't have to be out there. They needed that process of collaboration to work.
Gotcha. Do you have any specific recommendations about who or where they might go just to get started on that process if they've finished their book and they're now ready to go out there and sell it?
A lot of the process, a lot of my talk yesterday was in self-editing, which is the act of learning a bit more about the craft and trying to get to an analytical frame of mind. So that business about putting a manuscript away and forgetting about it for a while, coming back to it, and then you're looking at it with a more objective state of mind. If you do that yourself, you're going to help your editor. You're going to save money because you're doing a lot of the kind of drudge, if I can call it drudge work, in correcting your manuscript in the first place. There are some computer software programs that help people edit. I'm in the process of writing a book on self-editing, and I'm going to evaluate those programs and see whether they're actually of any good. I mean, there's a cost associated with all of them. And again, that's something I'm probably going to be talking to Lawrence on BooksGoSocial about, doing some publicity for. I've lost the train of my.
We were doing. What do you recommend they do? What's the next step, or who do they go to?
Well, I'll start again. But perhaps one of the most, especially if you're starting out writing, one of the best things you could do is actually talk to an editor.
Really?
There is an expense to it, but as I was explaining to one of the attendees at the conference yesterday, a developmental edit, yes, it's the most expensive form of editing. There can be, I've edited manuscripts where there are nearly 10,000 corrections, additions, deletions, whatever. That's not necessarily a particularly large number. Also coming with a developmental edit is a 5,000 to 6,000, 7,000 word editorial report going through, you know, the structure of the book and so on, other bigger picture issues. So there's an awful lot of work involved in it, which is why it's expensive.
Right.
But instead of looking at it as an expense that you can't really bear for that book because you may not make the money back on the sales of that book or whatever, the thing to do is to look at it as it's essentially a one-on-one masterclass in writing, or at least a masterclass if you've got a good editor, which I hope you've done your due diligence and found out about them and found out whether they're worth, you know, whether they know what they're talking about. But it's a one-on-one masterclass in the art of writing, totally bespoke, totally designed with you in mind. You're not part of a writing class and you're all different levels and the lecturer is talking to, you know, has to sort of break their message up. It's completely down to you. And also the beauty of it is they're using your text, your book, as the textbook. So, you know, it's a great, what you learn by getting a developmental edit like that will stand you in such good stead for the rest of your writing career.
Right.
You know, I mean, there are some people who, and there's nothing wrong with it. They just want to get a book out. It's a memoir. They're not really worried about commercial sales. They just want to hand it to friends or family or whatever. That's fine. In that case, there may be no great need for huge, expensive rounds of editing. But if you want to be a writer, that's a different thing entirely, and a developmental edit early on in your career will stand you in great stead.
Fantastic. Well, do you have any funny or strange stories about marketing and publishing and editing?
I could tell you quite a few howlers that I've come across my desk in terms of things that writers have unintentionally written, things that are quite amusing. But client protection tells me that I can't really talk about them. But not in public anyway. Maybe meet me afterwards in the bar. Thanks.
There we go. All right. Well, just one last question then. How did you like the conference?
Fantastic. Really, really good. Dublin's always a great place to meet. Lawrence is fantastic. The whole BooksGoSocial thing is really working for all the people that are involved in it. This particular writers' conference is unique, as Lawrence said a number of times. It's a writers' conference, so it's a conference for writers. It's not necessarily a conference for readers, although they're very welcome, and it's not a conference for publishers, but it's a conference for writers and the people who are providing them some services. And it's also of a really nice scale. I kind of hope, I said this to Lawrence last night, I hope it doesn't grow too big, because there's a beautiful scale at the moment. If you go to a big event, a big literary event, you have to choose between, oh, I want to go and see David Mitchell on that stage, or I want to go and see Annie Proulx on talking on the main stage, or whatever. And you have to decide. Here, it was a sequential thing rather than a serial. So you could see, you heard everybody speak. And it's a lovely scale, and you got to meet everybody afterwards.
Yes. Well, I am glad you enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me.
My pleasure. Thanks.